Okay, so we're using the Chenrezig practice called the welfare of living beings that pervades space. It's the one that's in between four-arm Chenrezig and thousand-arm Chenrezig. So that's what we'll be using. And we'll also have time for discussion and Q&A this session. And okay, so we'll use the refuge in this prayer to set our motivation. So just take a minute. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit living beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit living beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit living beings. Okay. So when you have these little short practices and then you have the longer versions of the same practice, most deities have short, medium, long versions. And it's kind of like it's important to look at the long versions at least a few times so that you have a connection with the more deep relationship with the practice. And then when you do the short version, it kind of reminds you of the long version. That makes sense? Yeah. And so then it's got more depth, what's kind of behind the scenes of the practice, like the symbolism and some of the background ideas a little bit better. So if you were to do just little Chenrezig practice in your daily practice, this short one would be fine. Yeah, it's just it's 2 pages long. And, you've got your refuge prayer, you've got a visualization, you've got a praise, you've got a visualization, you got the mantra, you dedicate. That's it. Done. But the thing is to keep this alive and moving for you is that you might decide to take just one line and go into a lot of depth with it, right? Like I take refuge until I'm enlightened. 5 minutes with that, even just 5 minutes with that. What does that mean? What am I taking refuge in? What am I taking refuge from? What are the objects of refuge? You go, okay, Buddha, Dharma, Supreme Assembly, but what is that? How does that relate to actually my inner conversation, my inner narrative, what I connect to? And what doubts do I have? What inspiration do I have? And you just really sit and let yourself unpack that. And you draw on teachings that you've heard, you draw on your life wisdom, and you might even have just a little pad and a little pencil next to your meditation cushion to write insights or questions. Yeah, here's a new connection I've made about this. Here's a new question I have about this. Put it aside and then continue with the rest of the practice. So these things only work if you engage with them. If you're reciting them as if they're magic spells that are just going to make you better by saying them or thinking them in a surface way, you're not engaging. It's like the Buddhas are reaching out and you're not reaching back. Or there's kind of a passive thing of, if I go through the motions, it's going to work. So it only works if you're really engaging with each part of it. And it starts to feel like in your own voice. Yeah. Which is not to say that you're going to reinvent it or start from scratch. It's that as you say it, it sounds more and more like what you say to yourself on a daily basis. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah. And when you go through a visualization like this, you know what the essence of the visualization is going to look like. So it might be that you just have a beautiful picture. You look at it for a minute, you close your eyes, you bring it to your mind's eye. And some days it might be that you look at it and you think, this represents this represents that, this represents this represents that, and you use it to wake up all of your other understandings. You think, oh, wait, what's that one bit? And you go into the book and you look through and you're like, oh, right, okay. Visualize. And now it's got more oomph, right? So it's got to be very much a deep inner conversation between you and yourself and you and the great beyond, both, for it to work. There was one question in the chat. Let me just read it here, which is, how do we practice subduing materialism and superstition? So that's related to the 8 verses, that last verse in the 8 verses, which said, undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So that last one, and we only just briefly touched on what those 8 worldly concerns are, but basically what you're trying to realize is that we have thought habits that are true enough that they go unchallenged, but they're not as true as they seem to be. So like comfort is important, discomfort is not good. You know, that's generally speaking a true thing, right? Like don't leave a rock in your shoe, like, you know, take it out, shake it out, make life easy for yourself. But the pressure we put on the need for comfort in order to be happy, and the need to be separated from discomfort in order to be happy, that is getting a lot more weight than actually exists. So it's really unpacking those thought patterns and stop taking for granted the things you assume need to happen in order for you to find some kind of contentment. Yeah, and so it really boils down to asking yourself, when I'm a little bit uneasy, what is it I'm saying I need in order to be at ease? And some of those might be practical, good, basic human needs that are absolutely true, like, a bit headachy, drink some water. Please do that, right? And some of it might be, okay, I have a mild level of discomfort in my body, but also I always have, right? And I've had good days despite that, and worse days despite that, right? Like that actually hasn't been the deciding factor in a good or bad day. But right now, while I'm feeling discontent, I've decided it's the thing ruining my fun. You know how we do that? So it's like we've chosen to emphasize something, and then we think the emphasis comes from its side. So breaking the superstitions and kind of getting out of materialistic thinking is saying something like, say, perhaps you're like, I like a singing bowl. Perhaps I'll buy a singing bowl. A singing bowl may facilitate my practice. Yeah, that'll do. And let me go online for 3 days, searching every possible variation of singing bowl and comparing it to my friends' singing bowls and see what one is going to be like showing who I am as a practitioner, blah, blah, blah. It becomes a whole story. And if you can't find it, you're horribly disappointed. And if you don't have it, you don't know if you can meditate anymore. That's a superstition, right? Like it just helps. You don't need it. Anyway, there's an app, right? Like it's one of these things where it's like, it's not like it doesn't matter, but it kind of doesn't matter. Yeah, pretty much like everything. It's not like it doesn't matter, but it doesn't really matter. What actually matters is how able you're able to work with your mind in response to anything. Yeah. So undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns. First, you have to kind of meet those 8 worldly concerns within yourself and notice which ones really feel true. Like if people criticize me, I can't be happy, or if people criticize me, that means I'm stupid, or whatever your story is about criticism, you know, you give it some space and you say, why do people criticize? Sometimes it's an honest assessment of my faults and they're wanting to share it in order for me to correct my behavior. Sometimes they're grumpy and they're taking it out on me. Sometimes it's nonsense and it's all their baggage. Sometimes it's honesty and their baggage. Like there's a million reasons why someone criticizes you, but you're just assuming it's one reason because that's what your reason would be, or one reason because you already have that vulnerability. And then you've also given it the power to take or give a sense of fulfillment and contentment and, I don't know, pride, whatever, right? You know, so it's just kind of like scanning through, you know, the 8 worldly concerns. Is comfort an issue? Is acquisition an issue? Is the way people speak to me an issue? Or is my reputation an issue? Or do they just take turns depending on the day, right? It's like, I don't care what people say to me, but I care what they think about me, right? Or I don't care what people think about me, I care about what they say to me. And maybe you don't care at all about any of those things, but you must have a certain kind of cup for your tea or it's not as delicious. whatever, or a certain kind of whatever, this or that. So it's one of these things where you also don't want to be silly. Like, for example, here we are in the Gompa. We know there's a lot of like meditation cushion supplies. There's lots of cushions, there's lots of mats. So if we're uncomfortable, we could just add a cushion or subtract a cushion. But if we didn't have any choice in the matter, we could also just make peace with what we have already. Like, both are true, right? So if it's an easy fix, you do it. But if it's not an easy fix, you don't let that take over your day. It's such basic common sense, and we already know it. It's just kind of pulling that common sense back to the surface again and again so that it becomes your natural way of thinking about life. Yeah. And then when you can start getting habit energy around anything, because the mind loves routine and it loves habits, and it will find ways to say, because this is how it's been done, that's the way it should be done. It loves that. We have to make sure occasionally we're checking in. Is that still true? Yeah. Is it a routine that should continue, or is it something I've just taken for granted? Is it still fulfilling the purpose or not? And the most important ones of those being your inner thought habits. Yeah. Here's what needs to happen in the morning for me to feel like my day is going well. Sometimes, maybe, sure. Gently, gently. So all of this relies on self-awareness, and self-awareness must be colored by compassion, or else you turn defensive. Yeah. If you have self-awareness without self-compassion, you become really fragile. Yeah. Because you become aware of what's going on for you, and you're like, wow, it is more of a mess than I had realized. And that should just make you go, how absurd, the human condition, right? Oh, well, better to know, right? But if you don't have self-compassion, you're going to say, I hope no one finds out. And if they do find out, I have to be ready with a justification. I have to be ready with an excuse. And I maybe even have to be ready with a weapon to attack so that they stop noticing these things I found out about myself. Yeah. Does it make sense? So what do you think fuels self-compassion? What makes you actually have self-compassion for yourself? Like, it's easy to say, right? But it's not like going to a spa. It's not self-care, you know, that's nice, but like, what is actual self-compassion that's going to rewire you? Yeah.
I think rewire is exactly that, like rewire the way you're thinking that you're hurting yourself and hurting everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Dependent origination.
Yeah, remembering dependent origination definitely helps with self-compassion, because it's really a story of context, isn't it? Yeah, when you think about your own context, it's easier to forgive yourself. And the thing is that all feels very self-centered, but it's not self-cherishing. It's self-awareness, it's not self-consciousness. And that's the difficult dance in Buddhism, is that sometimes the more self-aware and mindful you become, also the more self-conscious you become, like a fragile 13-year-old who's like, are my clothes cool enough? You know, and like we've fully grown out of that stage, but somehow we like revert into some adolescent insecurity of what do people think about me now that you've been going so far inward. So we don't want self-consciousness, you know, which is really like, how do I appear? What we want is self-awareness, which is, what am I saying to myself, and is it true? And if it's unkind, you know, to really ask, if I said that same thing to a friend of mine, would that be harsh? Right? And if it'd be harsh to a friend, it's harsh to you. Yeah. And if your friend was in a bad way and trying to unpack a bad habit, how would you help them unpack it? You'd talk about their history. Yeah, we'd say, remember that time you had that trauma. Remember that time you had that wound. Remember how you were brought up. Remember the society you were brought up in. Remember your socioeconomic status. Remember the systems of oppression that you were surrounded with. Remember this, remember that. Of course you wound up this way. Of course you did. You're not at fault. It's your responsibility, but you're not at fault. Now you decide what you want to do with what you came into this world with. Yeah, what led you up to this point? This is not yours. It just landed here, but it's the material you're working with. You know, so you kind of unpack the context and you think, how can I judge my past self based on my present day wisdom? I'm wiser now than I was then. How can I be so punishing about those foolish things I did then? You know, hindsight's 20/20. And maybe even I made mistakes that I did know better at the time, but was I as focused then? And this is why when we do a simple breathing meditation before doing a practice, it becomes so important for the practice to actually land, because distraction is one of our biggest enemies. Once we've actually gotten on a spiritual path, once we're actually trying to be a deeper, kinder, wiser person, when we're not, how come? Because we're distracted, right? We're not plotting evil plans, right? We're not Mr. Burns, right? What shall I do, right? Like, we're not plotting. We're nice people. And then we do horrible things. Why? We were distracted. Yeah. And so then the old habit had an opportunity to resurface. So by practicing focus and concentration, then you actually live up to the standard you're able to live at more consistently. You know, so it's a great kindness to yourself as well as to others to practice focusing a little bit more. It's tricky when you're a generally polite person that people like, because you can kind of get away with it not being totally mindful. You can kind of get away with it because you're nice enough. They'll like you anyway. You're not that bad. You got friends, right? You can get away with not being focused and mindful all the time. But what about in the moment of truth, right? Like, what about when your friend experiences a celebration or a tragedy and you're too distracted to notice this is a big deal and to respond accordingly? And you're like, oh yeah, good for you. And they're like, no, really, this is a huge deal. I just finished my PhD after 15 years. And you're like, oh yeah, good work. You know, and they're like, no, I need more, you know, or their cat just died. And, you know, actually for them, their cat was their best friend. This is a huge deal. For you, you like your cat's nice, but it's not going to destroy your world. But for them, that's an epic deal. If you're distracted, you're not going to notice that's a really big deal for them. Like, give it a minute. You know, so it's this thing of not taking for granted the fact that you're already a kind and loving, good person that people like. That is a wonderful thing in this world. But that best version of you could be the more present, consistent version of you. And then your best version might actually elevate. Yeah. And that is a great act of kindness to yourself as well as others. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions so far? Yeah, or thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
When I'm doing meditation, I'm able to keep my focus, not get distracted from things around me.
Mhm.
If I really work hard,
Yep.
airplane or kitchen sound. But what I have trouble with is my mind tries to plan the things in the future. And that's my hardest thing. And the funny thing is, I keep telling myself that the future doesn't exist. So you're planning something that doesn't even exist. And yet I find that difficult. I'm wondering, other than meditating on emptiness, is there anything else that can, is that just my obsessive mind, or is that a common thing where you start, you know, it could be simple planning.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
when I leave here, I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's totally normal. I mean, and some people, you know, some people plan, and that's their default. When there's mental space, when they start to settle down, when they start to focus, that invites planning, or it invites ideas, or it invites reminiscing, and it invites going into the past and sort of like sifting through the greatest hits of your memories and then perhaps sprinkling in a soundtrack, right? Your greatest hits of your memories, or your worst failures, adding a sad soundtrack, right? Like Tiny Violin, right? Or it comes into what do I need to think about to make this more stimulating in this moment? Yeah, so it really doesn't matter what the distraction is. The approach is the same, which is you go, yep, I see that that's happening. And back to the breath. Yeah, and back to the breath. And the thing is that the breath is really boring. It's totally boring. And so know that, right? Like, don't think that it shouldn't be boring. Let it be boring. Be interested in the fact that, wow, I'm really bored right now. Yeah, I am bored. I would like to augment this experience with some color, right? I'd like to augment this experience with some sound. Like, notice yourself wanting to do that and be disciplined enough to say, let's just see what happens if I don't. Let's see what happens if I don't. Just keep coming back. And sometimes the most profound thing you'll find is once the meditation finishes, right? Just like 5-10 minutes of consistently coming back to your meditation object. It doesn't have to be the breath. It could be a mental image. It could be a concept like compassion, or it could be an analytical meditation. It doesn't matter. But afterwards, how do you feel? And there's often a lot more clarity and a lot more relaxation. And you kind of feel like you're back to yourself. Yeah, the relative self, but like you're grounded. Yeah. So the meditation isn't really supposed to be easy at our level. If it's easy, you're probably in a half sort of dreamlike state of hazy vagueness. And we do not want a half dreamlike state of hazy vagueness where you're not totally asleep, because if someone said, hey, you'd be like, yeah. Right? But like, we don't want to make ourselves more spacey. Yeah. And there are some people who do meditate for 20, 30, 40 years, and I've met them and I love them, but they have been allowing the space cadet sort of meditation the whole time, and they are vague, right? And it's not even because of the pot, right? Like, they are just vague. And so we don't want that to happen, which is why when you're not being led in a meditation, do shorter sessions. Like, we can do a half-hour, 2-hour session when we're all together because we're holding each other and because someone was walking you through it. But when you're by yourself, do shorter sessions so that you stay clear the whole time and don't develop bad habits. Yeah. So a good meditation isn't not having distraction. A good meditation is bringing yourself back from distraction consistently. And if it's one of those days where it's like a battle, like every 10 seconds you're off with the fairies, but every time you go off with the fairies, you say, come on back. That is a good meditation. Yeah. And, you know, if you were steady for 10 minutes and then you drifted for an hour, but you were sitting very still, right? That is not impressive. Like, way to sit still, but also you're a grown up, so that's less impressive now, right? So, you know, just kind of really think about, no one is watching except you and the Buddhas. The Buddhas love you already. You have nothing to prove. Yeah, it's really like, get into the nitty gritty of what is going on for you. And so, you know, so again, also the breath sometimes is problematic if you're not feeling totally comfortable in your own skin, or a lot of your anxiety lives in your upper breath. So if for some reason the breath is the wrong focus, that's totally fine. You can shift to something else or shift lower. So normally we focus at the breath at the nostrils, but you can also focus at the abdomen where it rises and falls, and that can sometimes help you if you've got a bit of anxiety. You can focus on the soles of your feet and see if you can sort of feel the heartbeat in the soles of your feet. You know, like when your feet are sort of really firmly planted on the floor, sometimes you can feel a little boom, boom of your heartbeat in your feet. That can be really grounding. But if the body itself is not particularly a safe place, bring to your mind's eye the image of the Buddha. And before you do any of the rest of the practice, you build it up and then you just hold it. Yeah, so you just hold the image, say, of forearm Chenrezig in the space in front or in the space above you, whichever is more comfortable. And as soon as it starts to get fuzzy and vague, you consciously sharpen up the details. And if it kind of wants to drift, you bring it back. And if it wants to change size, you tell it to come back to the size you intended in the beginning. And so it's just, you keep coming back to your original intention again and again. And that is what builds up your powers of concentration. So then if you were to switch from Chenrezig to Medicine Buddha or something, it's not like a whole new thing to learn. It's the same skill set. Now it's blue, you know, so like that. Yeah, other questions? Did that answer your question? Or are you worried about why exactly do you worry about the future the most?
I guess, like you say, if you're a planner and you suddenly have a space that's open, it's like you want to go there.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Can I ask a second question?
Sure, yeah.
When I'm able to really focus and start not having thoughts, I start having, when I say there are no thoughts, but it's not clear either. It's almost like there's strands of thought. And there is, I can't put it like, I can't name it. It's not a thought, but it's like, it's not clear.
Yep.
I don't know if you've read Harry Potter.
Of course I've read Harry Potter.
But you know how, what's his name, with full strands of, thoughts in the head. It's
Put him in the
almost like-
pensieve, yeah.
Yeah. So when that happens, it almost feels like these little clouds
Yeah.
or strands. Does that mean it's a step before full clarity, or does it mean you've actually stepped out and you're going kind of in a side direction and you have to do something else to not?
Yeah, no, what you're pointing to is a really common confusion about your relationship to thoughts. You're not trying to get rid of thoughts. You're not trying to get rid of thoughts.
So there's
You're not trying to get rid of thoughts. Hear that, all right? Is that landing? You're not trying to get rid of thoughts.
Right.
Okay, first
Right.
step. Second step is you're trying to change your relationship to thoughts.
Right.
So it's the same confusion that people get about objects, right? When we talk about renunciation, they think they have to give up all their stuff. They have to sell their house, live the van life, right? No, you change your relationship to things. The things are not the problem. The thoughts are not the problem. It's your relationship to them, right? And so when you're trying to train the mind, don't worry if your thoughts are noisy or loud, if they're wispy or if they're very clear. Don't worry about what your thoughts are doing. Just be like, thought. Anyway, back to the breath. Yeah.
It's almost like I'm fooling myself.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten rid of it, but actually I have a relationship to this
Yeah.
strandy kind of vague thing that.
Absolutely.
cannot
And
make
thoughts
sense.
don't have to have words, right? Conception doesn't have to have words. I used to think that conception had to have words. I was a much more chatty in my head person than I am now. But I remember saying to my dad once, so what are you thinking about right now? And he'd be like, nothing. And I'm like, no, really? And he'd be like, no, seriously. Yeah, nothing. Just static. Nothing. And I was like, really? This is amazing, right? But of course he had conception present. There just weren't words in his head, right? No words in his head. So some people are more chatty in their head than others, but we had thought when we were babies before we had language. Ants have thought, right? Doesn't mean it's with words. Sometimes it's images, sometimes it's sensations, any number of things, right? So conception is our way to access perception. So it is true that we want to kind of move beyond conception or beyond thoughts in some way. It's not about stopping them, it's about utilizing them correctly, and that will open up direct perception. So we do want direct perception, and clarity of mind meditations are one of the ways to get there. So when you're doing a clarity of mind meditation, you're really doing that beautiful, poetic, try to identify with the sky, not the clouds, right? Try and identify with the reflective, expansive aspect of the mind, not the moving conceptions of thoughts and emotions, right? That classic sky, not the clouds that we know and love. That meditation is very powerful, but it's not like you get rid of the clouds. It's that you're shifting emphasis to the sky. Yeah, you're not getting rid of thoughts. You're shifting emphasis to what seems to hold the thoughts or reflect the thoughts. And they will naturally quiet down, and that's nice. Yeah, they will quiet down and they'll become less problematic and the weather will be gentler, right? It's nice. But sometimes they won't. Sometimes they get worse. They're like, well, now that you're looking at me, here's all the stuff, right? Yeah. So sometimes what can happen is that it's a good idea to do a pre-meditation meditation. Yeah. Paper and pencil, writing or not writing, but just like not even quite in meditation posture, because sometimes then you'll develop a bad habit to do this while meditating. But so like before meditation, sitting like this and just being like, oh, okay, I'm going to meditate in a minute. But right now, I'm going to drift. and I'm going to allow space, and I'm going to allow boredom. And with a little bit of space and boredom, I'm going to remember what I have to do next, right? And you'll write down your plan, or you'll remember that bit of poetry you wanted to get down, or you're going to remember whatever thing. Okay, your creativity will return to you. Different problems will become clearer. What's kind of eating you is going to become more obvious. And you go, okay, well, this could be endless. So at some point, I just have to call it. Yeah. And say, okay, that's what's going on for me today. Good to know. Write down a couple notes if I need to. Get milk, soy milk. Oh, yeah. Okay. Supply chain issue. Almond milk. Oh, almond milk problematic. Oat milk. Yes. Okay. And then sit. Yeah. So it can be on the same space, right? But what you're trying to do is to give yourself a chance to focus, because sometimes the whole first part of your meditation is like a war with all of the stuff you've been putting off. Yeah. 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 Any other questions or thoughts so far? Yeah, go ahead.
So I've heard before that to counteract dullness, you can make an image smaller and vice versa. Does that hold true?
Yeah, when you're trying to work with dullness or agitation, sometimes making the image smaller or larger can help, or brighter or heavier can help, right? So if your mind is really sleepy, you can, whatever image you're visualizing, turn up the light. Yeah, make it brighter, like a car headlights on high beam, like, okay, I'm awake, right? And if your mind is really flying away in a million directions and it's really busy, have the image have a sense of a little bit of weight. So weight and light are talked about a little bit more than size, but size, if that works for you, you can definitely experiment with size. The important thing is to arrive at a conclusion of what you're going to visualize and then stabilize on it. And it will not cooperate. Like, know that it won't cooperate, and it'll be all nice and clear and then suddenly get fuzzy. It'll be all nice and clear and suddenly drift. Don't worry about that. Just keep coming back to your original plan. Don't let your mind decide where it's going to go. You tell it. That's the main thing. The same is true if you're doing an analytical meditation on something like compassion, and then something brilliant occurs to you about the wisdom realizing emptiness. You say, that is important, but not now. Yeah, I've decided to meditate on compassion, so I'm going to meditate on compassion, because your mind will always find a way to pull you off. Yeah, there's so much resistance we have to progress because it challenges the ego. So tell it, no, later. That isn't a very good thought. That's very important, very smart. Well done. No, right? Compassion right now, wisdom later. Yeah. But if you've decided both, then both, right? But it's very important that you accomplish what you set out to do. Otherwise, you're never going to get any momentum. Yeah. You're going to grow, but kind of like all over the place randomly. And it's not going to have the same strength and foundation. Yeah, anything from the online Zoomers? Questions
Yes,
about
sorry, I have always a question. When I used to hear about that we don't have to chase, should not chase the good sensation of bliss or something, and I used to say to myself that it's easy because I didn't ever know that even what was bliss.
Yes, I understand.
And,
Yeah.
and now I think I'm searching for something that this is bad. This is not what I wanted to do, but I'm here. I'm saying to myself, I'm learning things, and all of a sudden, like kind of anxiety comes, and I say, what if I don't like it? What if all this? And it ruined all my momentums. I don't know what to do. Maybe is it a suction meditation which you don't grasp on anything? Maybe it is good to change a little bit. Like you come to not a nothing, but just don't grab to anything. Just be. Would it be helpful for somebody like me?
Not grasping is just a good general rule, right? A good general rule for all meditations. So when we're doing any kind of meditation, sometimes you're anticipating and worrying. Sometimes you're anticipating and excited. Sometimes you're anticipating and, then you get distracted. I mean, anticipation is a thing that's going to happen. And, it's going to be a little bit of a mission for us to just say, let's see, because you have control over some of the conditions in your meditation, and some of the conditions in your meditation you have no control over yet at our level, right? So it's having a kind of confident humility that your mind can become enlightened. You can learn things. You already know that. And how fast it goes, how deep it goes is somewhat related to effort, merit, repetition. And some of it's related to so much stuff from the past that it's going to take a little while to unpack it all. So first of all, you're not comparing yourself to anyone else, but you're also not comparing yourself to yourself on those days where it all kind of came together. Because on those days where it all came together and it was quite blissful and quite profound, you were in control of some of the aspects and not all of them. So just, enjoy it and keep moving. And part of the reason I go on and on about the three principal aspects of the path is that without those, then whatever experiences happen can very easily be turned into poison. Right? Without bodhicitta, you get lost in bliss for your own sake. It becomes spiritual entertainment and just one more way to reinforce samsara. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So keep remembering why you're doing this, and what is happening is less important. Keep coming back. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this for the sake of all sentient beings. I'm going to become enlightened for all sentient beings. And with that undercurrent, bodhicitta is the reason to practice Tantra. There is no other reason to practice Tantra than bodhicitta. Yeah, that is the reason. You need renunciation, you need the correct view, but the reason for Tantra is bodhicitta. If you're not doing Tantra for the sake of others, don't do Tantra. Go back, Doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean you're a lost cause. It means go back to where you actually are and work on that a bit more. So, I think one of your questions that you sent in the chat was, Tantra is supposed to bring all of this benefit in one life. And it does bring all of this benefit in one life if you've read the terms and conditions, right? And sometimes we have not read the terms and conditions. We just click the box, right? The terms and conditions are renunciation, bodhicitta, the correct view. Yeah. Tantra is profound if you have those three firmly in your mind. Ideally, a realization. And of course, without the realization of those three, tantric practice isn't going to achieve enlightenment in one life. But if you do have those three, but not a realization, just a commitment to and an understanding of, Tantra can help a huge amount in this life and shift so many things. Negative habits, old moods, sadnesses, traits of selfishness, intelligence can increase, memory can increase, health and well-being can increase. All sorts of amazing things can happen with Tantra in one life, in this very life, even before you have any realizations. But for it to equal enlightenment in one lifetime, you need those terms and conditions. Yeah. So if you're wondering why your tantric practice is stuck, check how's your bodhicitta, how's your renunciation, how's your correct view. And, and it seems even more basic, but very important is how's your refuge? Yeah, how's your refuge? What is refuge? Yeah, because at the end of the day, the real refuge is the Dharma that you have integrated. Yeah, like we say this, here's a book. This book is Dharma. This is a Dharma book, but it's only a refuge if I have integrated it and digested it. Then it will protect me from suffering. then it will protect me from ignorance and from causing harm. It's not doing anything for me until I make it my own. Right? So
Are you agree with that? Sometimes it's not like a worldly concern when you are doing a meditation or going to a new path of tantric practice. You have all this responsibility, and it can be overwhelming.
yeah.
So you can say to yourself, okay, I have my bodhicitta, I love Buddha, I am in it, I do everything I can, but all of a sudden you say, I'm a good person and I want to do good, but it's too much.
Yeah.
That's in this part too. It become tricky, but I knew that it's a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it
Right?
is.
Because it's different, because it's
Yeah, look, it is. Tantra is a big deal, quite so. And definitely you're going to get overwhelmed and think, look, I did want to work for the welfare of all sentient beings until this and stress started happening in my life. And now I'll do my best for sentient beings, but I need to get through the day. Yeah. Or, I'll do what I can for the sentient beings, what I know, but this kind of cosmic idea of all sentient beings, I'm gonna have to look.
isn't the divine pride can be helpful in this moment for me or for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So Ladan's mentioning kind of this philosophical concept of divine pride and clear appearance, which are only for people with the empowerment. Without the empowerment, you try clear appearance and then strong aspiration. Yeah, but what it's doing is Tantra is ripening through rehearsal. This is the phrase we want to get in our mind. What is Tantra doing? It's ripening the seeds for our enlightenment by rehearsing our enlightenment. Yeah, it's taking the result as the path. That's why it's called the resultant vehicle. And so in order to do that, you need to sort of put aside or challenge the way you think you are in that facade way and really say, my personality and everything I identify about myself exists relatively, is here, sure, but is not me. My Buddha nature has always been with me and will develop into enlightenment. I'm going to shift my identity there. And not just its latent stage of potentiality, I'm going to identify with what it will be. And adopting that attitude also means you see other people that way too. So adopting divine pride is not about, I am the Buddha and no one else is, I'll help you poor suckers. It's, I am the Buddha and you are also the Buddha and everything around me is the Pure Land and all sounds are mantra. Right? Which can make you a little nutty without renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct you, right? So again, like proceed with caution, have a teacher, have refuge. So, at our stage, like it can start to get overwhelming if you don't have the empowerment yet, but you're really curious about these things. Really what you're doing at this stage is making a connection with the archetypal energy. Yeah, you're deepening your connection with compassionate wisdom. And deepening your connection with compassionate wisdom is going to have more access to you, and you're going to have more access to it. And there's going to be this meeting of minds, collaboration within you and around you, where more and more things are going to tell you about how to develop compassionate wisdom. But also you're going to feel people being compassionate and wise towards you too. So it's like support will come and support will be offered, because you're now really opening up the lines of communication. So this happens before any empowerment. You're opening up the lines of communication, you and the divine. The lines of communication were already open to a certain degree, and now you're really inviting a wideness and a depth. So the mantra alone helps with that. The meaning of mantra is that which protects the mind. And I think we say that in a kind of throwaway way, like, isn't that nice? Mantra means that which protects the mind. And it's like, no, honestly, it protects the mind. If you're not doing so well and you don't know what to think or do or strategize or analyze, maybe don't. Maybe just say the mantra, right? Circuit breaker, the madness, change the pattern, change the energy, and just see. It really does help. Yeah, and I think all of us have that experience of when you're in a really bad state and you try to analyze your way out of it while you're in it, you often make it worse. When you settle, then you can turn back around and analyze it. But in the middle of your madness, your analysis will not help you. It will just distort and reinforce you're crazy. And we're all a little crazy. Yeah. So circuit breaker, you're like, okay, I think I'm going down a rabbit hole of Nutty's town. Okay, oh, money penny, oh, money penny, oh, money. And you might not have any visualization, any intention. You might have forgotten to do a motivation. You're just, oh, money penny, humming, and it helps. And then you start to settle and you're like, okay, visualization, white, light, oh, money penny, white, light. Right? Okay, refuge. Okay, bodhicitta. Okay, and then you actually have the mental space to do the practice or not. Just the mantra itself has a lot of power, and the thing is just do it with an open mind, see what happens. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do this practice now in kind of a gentle way that is slightly more elaborate than the last time we did it. This very, very short version. And with this very short version, what you can do is weave in Tonglen, and normally this would have the four immeasurable thoughts next to refuge and bodhicitta. So it's not written in the text, the four immeasurable thoughts. It's in, I think, all the other practices. So I'll just walk you through them. You don't have to go hunt for it in another text. I'll just walk you through the four immeasurable thoughts. But whenever you see the four immeasurable thoughts in a practice, it's an invitation to do Tonglen. You don't have to, but it's an invitation. At the end of any four immeasurable thoughts prayer, you can kind of push pause on the practice and add Tonglen for a bit. So you can also add it when we do those 8 verses of thought transformation at verse 7, the secretly one. Yeah, that's the invitation for Tonglen there. But here we're just going to do it's very simple form. And basically what you're doing is saying, I do not want self-cherishing. Okay, self-cherishing is ruining my life and my relationships. So I'm going to take all of my own suffering and all of the suffering of all sentient beings and give it to the self-cherishing thought, and let the self-cherishing thought absorb it and be weakened by all that suffering. And then my self-cherishing wants to keep all of my happiness. It clings to it. It hoards it. It's miserly about it. It says, no, these comforts are mine. Don't take them from me. And so you say, I see you self-cherishing. I'm going to give them all away. Yep, all of my happiness, just the present happiness. Oh, also the future happiness to all sentient beings. And these two ideas are basically the elevated form of loving kindness and compassion. Compassion is wishing all sentient beings to be free from suffering. Now you're saying, and what's more, I'm going to take that suffering. Loving kindness is wishing all sentient beings to have happiness. And now you're saying, and what's more, I'm going to give it to them. I'm not just going to let it live in aspiration. I'm going to engage with it in real time. And it's just on the level of imagination. You're not hurting yourself. It's a mental attitude shift. And you know how different things feel when they're voluntary, right? Like if you're moving house and you're lifting heavy boxes, you can get grumpy and tired because of the effort of moving weight. If you've decided to go to the gym to get stronger, that same amount of weight is the same amount of discomfort, but you don't mind because you chose it on purpose, right? So this is some of the background psychology of this kind of meditation. You make it voluntary, it's a whole different thing.